Hi, everyone. Welcome to Identity Crisis, a show from the Shalom Hartman Institute creating better conversations about the essential issues facing Jewish life. I'm Yehuda Kurtzer. We're recording this introduction on Wednesday, June 18th, 2025.
These are very unusual days here in Israel. Days when pride and fear live side by side. Days of danger and destruction in Israeli cities that we didn't know of. And yet, moments of deep uplift and clarity for me. Maybe this is what it means to be Israeli. To have friends, to have sons and daughters who, when missiles fall, don't run away from them, away from Israel, but run towards it. To be part of the people that chooses shared destiny over comfort.
These days are definitely not fun. We're shocked and saddened by the images of destruction and fatalities in the nightly missile attacks. Our bodies are edgy and stressed by the pre-alert of 15 to 30 minutes before fire, the loud screechy SMS that we get when there's a launch, and the sirens that tell us that there are 90 seconds to go into shelter. And we're all on track to become a very cranky nation due to disturbed sleep. But even during such days, Israeli humor is keeping its head up, and social media is full of comments like, "I don't think it's proper education to let kids have another war before they finish their first." Or, Homefront Command says remain close to reinforced shelters. Homefront Command says enter shelters. Exit shelters. I didn't say Homefront Command.
Oh my gosh. So Thursday night, we're woken up at 3 a.m. and told we're at war with Iran. I've never been at war with Iran. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I just came here for a year. I'm just a New Yorker. What do you expect of me here? So in the morning, I run, I get gas for my car, and I take out cash, and I go to the grocery store and wait online for an hour because I have no idea what the heck any of this means or what it could become. And then the Israelis start checking in on me. And of course, then I have to play it cool, you know? They're like, "So, how you doing? How you holding up?" And I'm sort of saying like, "Well, you know, we're just going to follow the protocols. We're just going to do what we're supposed to do." And they're saying to me, "Oh, you sound like a real Israeli." And I'm just freaking out inside.
I was having dinner with my family at around 8 or 8:30 p.m. last Thursday night when my phone started buzzing. We try to be phone-free at our dinner table at home with the kids, so I planned to send the call to voicemail until I saw that it was Daniel Hartman calling at what would have been 3:30 a.m. his time. We all have those moments in life when you get a phone call at a time when it shouldn't be happening and you feel a pit in your stomach. There's nothing going to be good about that call. You brace yourself for the news you're about to hear. Daniel shared with me his version of what you'll hear now from my colleague Jordanna Amsel, Director of Development for Israel Programs at the Shalom Hartman Institute.
So on Thursday night, I woke up at 3 a.m. from this crazy buzzing noise like I've never heard before in my life, being jolted awake. And my husband and I had no idea what that actually meant. I think a lot of Israelis were confused. It was a totally new kind of message. It wasn't clear if we should go into the mamad or exactly what was happening. And I think since that moment, there's been so much uncertainty. And I think fundamentally this war feels so different than anything else I've experienced in Israel in my 6 years of living here. Totally different even than October 7th. This period feels more intense.
The Homefront Command in Israel had sent out a buzzing national alert, waking up the country, signaling that the war with Iran had begun. It wasn't quite an alert yet of an imminent Iran attack. Those would start coming in droves over the next few days. This was like the country waking up people to tell them to check their phones. It was a national request. Be nervous. Be vigilant. Beware. What a strange, impossible time we're living through. Since Thursday, I've lost track of what day it is a bunch of times. I'm not nearly as sleepless as my loved ones in Israel, who are going on nearly a week of nights interrupted by sirens, but I find that it's not easy to close my eyes at night either. I've found myself feeling like I'm in an undiagnosed, non-clinical form of some manic depression. On one hand, working as hard as I've ever worked to help pivot our organization and our summer activities, and also checking the news constantly for war updates. I have less interest and patience right now to spend a lot of time thinking and talking about military analysis of Israel's war plans and strategies. I'm quite sure that some of the breathless glee that many Israelis and pro-Israel supporters were expressing in those first few days, reminiscing about the surprise attacks of the Six-Day War, seeing parallels to the present, that a lot of that stuff was too soon and too short-sighted. I'm also willing to admit, unlike it seems most people, that my knowledge of Iran's nuclear program and my understanding of centrifuges and bunker-busting bombs is limited, to say the least. No, what I'm drawn to right now is more of the viscerality of the stories of war and confusion and fear and hope. Those seem like the kinds of human experience that are the ripest for expanding our minds and hearts, the most fitting for us to try to seed with wisdom. I think a lot about what we learn from the experience of living through history. Our minds and our bodies are inclined to walk through the world with the power of instinct and to respond to the stimuli around us in the moment. But we, as individual people and as communities and even maybe as a species, we are formed by each and every one of these moments, and probably more by the dramatic moments than by the banal ones. Which is to say, we pivot in moments like this, but the pivoting is not merely a change in our position or our posture like a temporary dance move. We are different as a result of all of that pivoting. That word, pivoting, it was so popular in Jewish organizational life at the time of the pandemic. It was considered a marker of success for those organizations that could innovate rapidly in response to the moment, and a kiss of death for those that couldn't mobilize quickly enough, lost ground as a result. I find the word pivoting now slightly nauseating, both because of its overuse and also because too much pivoting can make you seasick, like what I imagine is being experienced right now by those 1,500 birthright students currently on a cruise ship somewhere in the Mediterranean trying to get home from Israel. After October 7th, we ran an episode that we quickly put together with voices of American Olim in Israel. We called that episode A Nation That Can't Sleep, unaware that sleeplessness would take on new qualities just 20 months later with the arrival of an onslaught of missile attacks that are the stuff of nightmares. So this time around, I turned to a number of senior colleagues at Hartman in Israel, scholars, faculty, senior professionals, for their reflections on this moment in Israel and in Jewish history. My colleagues' experiences and how they narrate them dance between the personal and the analytical. I find that to be another way of being in the world, where you combine the stuff of the heart and the mind. You never fully divorce them from one another. These experiences reflect a mix of the sobering and the inspiring. Here's Elana Stein Hain, who you heard earlier, senior faculty and Rosh Beit Midrash at Hartman North America, who finds herself living through this second war, not just the first war that she signed up for, but this second war as the coda for a year spent living in Israel with her family.
So I want to talk about having life orbit around a miklat, a bomb shelter, one of those public building-wide bomb shelters, which is what we have. And definitely the last 4 days have been most intensely revolving around the bomb shelter, like really not going too far, just in case. But to an extent, the whole year in some ways has kept bringing us back to the shelter, from the first Iranian attack of this year that we've been in Israel in, I don't remember if it was September or October, to Houthi attacks every so often, to now the war with Iran. And there's just a few things that stand out that I would never know them if I wasn't here. And the first one is just this little boy who we have basically seen like almost have a year of his life through only seeing him in the miklat. When, I don't know if he was 7, 8, 9 months old, we first met him in the miklat when Iran was lobbing missiles at Israel. And he was just this little cute infant, no teeth, really docile, very attached to his mom, and his dad was fighting in Lebanon. And then, we saw him again when the Houthis attacked, and, little baby tooth here, baby tooth there. His dad was back. The dog started coming down with them to the miklat. And now you were with like a fully babbling 1.5-year-old who, we just know from the miklat. And it's just, it's both tragic to see that, and it's also a testament to the belief and the hope that life goes on, even amidst deep uncertainty. The miklat also has older people there, and older people who can't always make it there, especially multiple times a night. And people have to go get them and walk them down the stairs and walk them back up the stairs and convince them to come down, that it's worth it for them to come down, even though it hurts to have to walk down those steps or to walk up those steps. But that's all they have. It's all they have. Or the decision to invite family members who live in areas of Israel that are being more densely targeted than Jerusalem. Just the decision to tell them to just come and sleep over at our house so that they can have access to our miklat. Because even though they have a miklat, or they have even a mamad, a safe room in their apartment or their home, there's just the barrage is just that much more intense. Or driving my son basically 3 blocks away to play basketball and staying there in case he needs a ride back because he has to get to the miklat. Or going to sleep and not really knowing how much or how little sleep you're going to get before that piercing sound comes your way to give you a warning that something is coming. That is just something I never would have appreciated. The miklat is a special place. It's a lot of people just waiting and sitting and being uncertain together. And there's nothing that says we're all in the same boat, like being in the miklat with people you don't know.
In other words, people are people, above ground or below. I loved what Elana said about all of the growing up that's taking place in these bunkers. It made me think about all that changed for young people throughout the COVID lockdowns. It made me think about the hostages still underground in Gaza, losing years of their lives to torture, fear, and boredom. It made me think about the thousands of dispossessed in Gaza who have lived through these kinds of bombing campaigns for the past 2 years. And Ilana's line about being in the same boat, it reminded me of the Midrash in Leviticus Rabbah, which says, quoting from the book of Numbers 16:22, "Shall one person sin and you will rage against the entire congregation?" Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai taught, this is analogous to people who were sitting in a ship. One of them took a drill and began drilling a hole. His counterpart said to him, "What are you doing?" He said to them, "Why do you care? Am I not drilling under myself?" They said to him, "Because the water will rise and flood the ship we are on." Sometimes being all together in one boat, like the people in the miklat together, the Jewish people across the world from one another, all of the citizens and inhabitants of the state of Israel, that experience makes us feel safer, like we're in it together. And sometimes, the Midrash reminds us, being in one boat is a reminder of how that interconnectedness obligates all of us. It shows how the decisions made in one part of the boat implicate everyone. Meanwhile, Elhanan Miller, who's a faculty member of the Hartman Institute's Chavruta Gap Year program for Americans and Israelis, also the founder of an initiative called People of the Book, which uses social media to reach and educate Arabs curious about Jewish faith and culture throughout the Middle East. For Elhanan, his experience of fleeing to safety didn't feel as new as Ilana's. It reminded him, as living through Jewish history often does, of a piece of his past and our past, a time when he was a younger person in Israel who was being formed, like those kids in the miklat, by fear and trauma.
When I try to think back in my living memory to what this war is most reminiscent of, I have to arrive at the first Gulf War in January and February of 1991. I was a 9-year-old kid, and I have these distinct memories of so many things that took place in that war, from my parents waking me and my brother up at 3 a.m. and carrying us to the sealed room in our home where we had wet towels and masking tape covering the doors and the holes and the windows to prevent chemical gas from entering, and giving us this oppressive sense. To the board games and the fun and the excitement we had on that first night, not knowing what would happen, apprehension and excitement. And finally, when the ceasefire was announced on the eve of Purim, we go to a Megillah reading and some kid uses the siren recording as the Haman noise, and the huge annoyance and anger at that child for scaring everyone after the ceasefire has already been reached. When I try to think back in my living memory to what this war is most reminiscent of, I have to arrive at the first Gulf War. That's kind of the feeling I feel many of us have now, of concern, but also a lot of excitement of change that might be coming. Of course, internationally, there was a big difference because back then it was Israel who was asked by President Bush to sit back and let the Americans and the coalition run the war and not interfere and not intervene. And here it's Israel doing it alone, and the U.S., for now at least, sitting back and not intervening. So that's diplomatically the difference. But there is, I'd say, the intensity of the war and this idea of a new prospect for a new future is giving Israelis a renewed sense of purpose and cohesion that we've lost, I think, during the last few months in the Gaza war, where in the most recent operation, we've been losing soldiers almost on a daily basis and have lost the sense of purpose and determination and direction, I would say, in achieving the goals of the war and in returning the hostages. And suddenly we're reinvigorated, and this war goes into phase 2. But of course, the Gaza war is continuing and soldiers are still falling there. And it's very jarring on the one hand to have these amazing successes that we're told about on TV on a rolling sort of basis, installations destroyed and scientists and, missiles being destroyed. But in Gaza, still that drudging on and daily grind of a war that hasn't ended. But I feel like this war, in addition to invigorating Israeli society and giving us again this sense of purpose and cohesion and solidarity, it also allows us for the first time to dream big and to imagine a future where Israel's most formidable enemy, most existential threat, Iran, which has been the snake's head, so to speak, the initiator and mastermind behind all of our enemies in recent years, from Hamas to Hezbollah to the Houthis, may be no more. Either the regime may be no more, or its capabilities may be so depleted that it won't pose such a existential threat against us. And dreaming big is something we haven't done in a while, I feel, at least since the beeper attack on Hezbollah, but in a much more significant and deep way, because there it felt like we were very much dealing with a symptom, and here we're dealing with the root cause, which is Iran. And, there's already been memes going around about, Chabad of Tehran or vacation opportunities in Iran. And I myself allow myself to sort of float and drift into those possibilities where we might have a different future with Iran. I know it's still too early to think about that, but it's inevitable given the adrenaline rush that all of us are feeling right now, at least as we watch Israeli coverage of this war. But we don't know yet. The home front has suffered deep losses and deep damage that Israel also never suffered. And even with Scuds falling in Tel Aviv and Ramat Gan in that first Gulf War, we've never seen the extent of damage that we're seeing now. So it is different than that war. But as a Jerusalemite, there is this familiar sense where the rockets are flying over our heads and hitting other cities and other residential centers in Tel Aviv and Haifa and in other places. And that's the same as it was in the first Gulf War, where the country was divided into areas of Aleph, Bet, Gimel, and we didn't have such a long warning. So we feel in some way much more pampered and in control. But on the other hand, we feel like Jerusalem has been spared the brunt of this war. So in that sense, again, perhaps a sense of complacency, which I hope won't take root. But Jerusalemites feel like it's not them on the front lines, unlike other Israelis.
Elhanan is testifying here to the experience of living in Israel throughout these two wars 30 years apart. from the experience of living under Scud missiles coming from Iraq in the early 1990s, and now ballistic missiles falling from Iran today. There's growing chatter out in the world about these two wars, and not just about how Israelis experience them, but how one might be precedent for the other. This is really concerning to me. The war in Iraq in 1991 led over the next decade to a rise in thinking that the goals for the war were not merely the mitigation of the threat that Iraq represented towards its neighbors and towards the West, but gradually a push towards regime change. This then happened with the capture of Saddam Hussein in 2003 by U.S. troops and his eventual hanging. In turn, it led to well over a decade of violent turmoil in Iraq, the ensnaring of American troops on the ground, an enormous amount of death and destruction to U.S. soldiers, to Iraqis, the future of a country now that remains dangerously uncertain. Lately, both Trump and Netanyahu have been dangling public thoughts about regime change in Iran, and it feels like one of those tantalizing ideas that those who put out into the world can only envision as a better alternative to the present, even though all of us watching this story with the benefit of that precedent know there's an equal or larger possibility that actually regime change could lead to something much worse. I think that's the trap of what Elhanan refers to as the floating and drifting in this moment of hope, as Israel seeks to permanently nullify its most potent enemy, less with a clear strategy, more with a dream. Then again, to not hope or dream, well, that would be fatalism, and we Jews are meant to be allergic to that. Shraga Bar-On, vice president of the Shalom Hartman Institute and director of the Kogod Research Center in Jerusalem, was much firmer and clearer in his optimism.
I recall a line of the great Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai, who once reimagined the rabbinic saying, En Baal Hanes Mekir Beniso. The one who lives through a miracle doesn't recognize it. And he wrote that even when the Red Sea split in two, each person only saw the sweat on the back of the one walking ahead of him. That's what it feels like now for me. We are trembling between recognizing the miracle and just living the moment. Most Israelis, I think, sense the power of this moment. It's fear, it's fire, it's a lot of sweat, and it's meaningful. And I believe it doesn't reflect only Brit Goral. We are not just fighting for survival. We are fighting for our mission. Right now, Israel is the tip of the spear for the free world, for liberal values. This is a war of no choice, but a double one, both existential and moral. To win it, we need support, every kind of support. And I want you to know it means more than I can say to feel the backing of our people in North America. You are partners, to know that your hearts are with us, to hear the voices that don't just emphasize, but stand with us, ethically and decisively. Solidarity is not just helpful, it's essential right now. For me, for the Israelis I work with, every expression that gives us the ability to stand, to continue fighting the day-to-day war here in our homes, and to continue sending our children and soldiers to all the battlefields that we now face, to feel that this war is against the axis of evil. It's not just our fight. It's a shared moral stand. And now to the future. The future is uncertain, now more than ever. And yes, sometimes very frightening. We don't have a lot of sleep during those nights. But I still believe with all my heart that good will prevail. Amichai also wrote a line that guides me for years. He wrote, במרחק שתי תקוות מהקרב חזיתי שלום. 2 hopes away from the battlefield, I saw peace. That's our challenge now, to turn military might into a path of peace, to translate courage into hope. And I believe, now more than ever, we may be closer to the real chance for a new Middle East, this time not only as a slogan, this time for real. But it depends on us, and it depends on your being with us.
I was struck by Shraga's appeal to diaspora Jews for their solidarity and support, and how much it reminded me of the discourse from right around October 7th and its aftermath. Earlier this week, in fact, I was talking to some of my faculty colleagues here in North America, and we noticed how much quieter the Jewish community in America is right now about this war than it was right after October 7th. Maybe that's because standing with Israelis right now as ballistic missiles rain down on their heads is easy. It's unproblematic compared to the tension that was so pronounced after October 7th because of the noise from the anti-Israel crowd. Maybe it's because Tehran is far away in a way that Gaza is not. Maybe because the idea that Israel can have legitimate grievances with Iran is very different than its continued and prolonged struggle with the Palestinians. Maybe it's because the fear that Israelis are feeling feels linked for many of us here with a generalized sense of ominousness that American Jews are experiencing. I don't know. Maybe it's too soon to draw conclusions about the state of Jewish solidarity, given the disruptions in these past 2 years. I suspect we're actually better off on that front than we think, but who knows? I think Shraga would appreciate that if it was true. There's just so much noise. I do agree with my colleague Ronit Heyd, though. Ronit is a VP at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Israel and director of the Center for Israeli and Jewish Identity, that this war is not going to erase the serious social and political divisions in Israel, but it might even expose them further. And I think she's right to fear, as you'll hear, that the appeal to solidarity sometimes involves suppressing of the useful kind of criticism that keeps a society morally vigilant.
One joke I received, which was a mock message from Iran, said, "We'll bring down your regime if you bring down ours." And it made me wonder, how many days will it take until criticism and doubt make their way back to the public discussion? For sure, we're all super impressed, even proud, with the achievements of the IDF, the Mossad, and other Israeli security forces. But merely a few hours before the wake-up sirens got us all out of bed at 3 a.m. early Friday morning, the level of criticism, anger, and frustration felt by so many Israelis towards the government were skyrocketing. Just on Thursday evening, a wife of a reservist accused Knesset member Yuli Edelstein of serving Israelis to slavery. She said that because of the compromise he reached with ultra-Orthodox parties that would delay by 2 years the enactment of significant sanctions on Haredi draft evaders. The majority of Israelis were appalled by this legislation that would once again exempt tens of thousands of yeshiva students from IDF service. So hours before this whole war started, the government just narrowly survived a no-confidence vote over this draft law. And there are more questions that are being brought up by the public. Many are now questioning the continuation of the war in Gaza, which continues to claim the lives of soldiers and to bring horrible destruction, starvation, and heartbreaking deaths to civilians in Gaza. With unclear goals and an extreme right-wing coalition, many of us are questioning Netanyahu's motives that seem more political to maintain his own coalition or even personal to avoid his trial, rather than actually strategic. And the hostages, 53 hostages that are still being held in captivity, and no deal in the horizon. More than 70% of Israelis want to end the war in Gaza in order to return the hostages, while the Prime Minister and his cabinet remain unmoved. So there's a lot of anger and a lot of frustration. So yes, 4 days into this new war with Iran, there are a few critical comments, even about this war. Most justified are those that cry out against the neglect of the home front needs for shelters, for proper defense rooms, especially in Arab localities, like Tamra, where 4 beautiful souls of Arab Israelis were killed Saturday night when their house was hit by a rocket. And I'm sure that as the days go by, the questions of the goals of this war will come up. This is our role as citizens. Yes, we take pride. Yes, we definitely pray for the safe return of our soldiers. And yes, we hope to see the success of a war that will probably create a tectonic shift in the history of our region. And we also criticize. We ask questions. We put forward the doubts. That is what being Jewish and democratic mean. Jewish pride, and democratic doubt. That's what we are here for.
Jewish pride and democratic doubt. That's a good phrase. It also works the other way around. Pride and democracy combined with Jewish epistemological humility, what we sometimes call doubt. Either way, to be serious people, we need to be saddled with both. I'm exhausted by those who immediately see the news from Israel on an issue as complicated and as emotionally intense as a war and cannot express anything but pride. I'm equally irritated by those who can't possibly do anything but criticize. I found it kind of shocking to see so many people completely convinced that this was a wag-the-dog war for Bibi for his political survival, despite the fact that in the past the Mossad and defense establishment have vetoed these kinds of military operations, as though war preparations these thorough happened overnight because there was a no-confidence motion in the Knesset the day before. The hatred of Bibi is so intense that it makes Israel less into a country and more, for its critics, into a cult of personality. And so the dance should be, as Ronit indicated, some amount of cautious pride, maybe even hope among citizens about anything a government does that you like, and some amount of healthy skepticism. Or it can happen vice versa. More importantly, can you notice while dramatic and eventful things are happening what is less visible? Can you see the seams? I felt this early on acutely in the war, as it started to become clear that the bombs falling from Iran represented a kind of intersectional form of oppression. They were disproportionately affecting the social and economic underclasses in Israeli society who live in housing without sufficient government support for adequate bomb shelters. Rana Fahoum, vice president of the Shalom Hartman Institute in Israel and director of our Center for Shared Society, reflected on this as follows.
In the shadow of the current war between Israel and Iran, many Palestinian citizens in Israel live in fear. We are mainly concerned with our safety since our Palestinian cities and towns lack shelters and safe public spaces. Most of the Palestinian population in Israel reside in the north or the south of Israel. In the north, as the tragic missile attack on Tamra a few days ago, which killed 3 wonderful women and a child, it proved again that we are not safe at all. There are no public shelters in our cities and towns, and if there is a few, then they are probably unfunctional due to many years of negligence. Tamra, for example, which is a small town in the north of Israel, has a population of 37,000 people, all Palestinian, has not even one public shelter or public safe place. If we compare Tamra to a close-by town of Mitzpeh Aviv, which is populated by 1,100 people, all Jewish, Mitzpeh Aviv has 13 protected spaces. The situation in the south is even harder. In the unrecognized villages of the Palestinian Bedouin community in the Negev and Naqab, residents are left entirely unprotected and with no access to safe places and no iron dome protection. They are considered open spaces, and the army does not use the iron dome protection in open spaces. In addition, to make the situation in the south even harder for the Palestinian Bedouin community, the current government has continued the policy of home demolition in the Arab society, and even with a rise of about 27% of home demolition, which is 10 times more than the rest of the country and 6 times more than the demolishing in the occupied territories of the West Bank by the Israeli army. These demolitions, especially in the south, literally leave people without a roof to protect them. Not only not a shelter, but not even a roof. It goes without saying that policies of inequality are not new, but at times of war, they become deadly. We feel the abandonment of the state of its citizen, especially the Palestinian citizens. Yet again, sometimes this abandonment is the policy. That's the best case scenario. And in other cases, they target the Arab population. Since the beginning of the current war, the trend of over-policing on us has raised its ugly head again. It's exactly the trend that we experienced immediately after October 7th, where the persecution of the Palestinian citizens on social media, and honestly, sometimes it feels that on even our thoughts, has rose again. On the other hand, we witness hatred and racism from some Jewish groups who express through social media and sometimes the formal media. They express joy at the death of the Arab citizens or harm done by the Iranian missiles on the Arab cities, and the police simply does nothing about it, even if we actually complain about it. This systemic and systematic discrimination once again reminds us of the deep inequality that shapes our daily lives, even in times of national emergency. Another very dominant feeling that we, the Palestinian citizens of Israel, feel is the fear that Gaza and the horrors there will be forgotten. We already feel devastated and very much ashamed that we haven't managed to stop the war in Gaza or to do anything to help with the relief of the population in Gaza. We watch the daily news and our heart breaks again and again and again. Before this war, we felt a little bit optimistic because there was a beginning of a momentum from Israeli Jews who were starting to ask to stop the war and to talk about the massacres that are happening in Gaza and the suffering of the population. And we started hearing about the moral aspects of the war and the high moral price that Israel is paying for what it's doing in Gaza. Our fear now with this war is that those voices will be marginalized again. And that's very disconcerting. And I think we are also very afraid that all the media, the world media, will be very busy with what's going on between Iran and Israel. And they will also stop reporting of what's going on in Gaza. And the horrors there are happening each and every minute of the day. In addition to all that, we obviously share the concern of many other Israelis on the motives of the current government, generally speaking, and specifically in initiating this war with Iran, and what are the consequences of this war on the region and maybe the whole world. One last word, Yehuda. The first and most important way to save democracy is through its relations to its minority. No democracy with occupation, and the most important path to true liberal democracy goes through the Palestinian citizens of the state. At least that's my take.
Rana's comments are a sobering reminder of something I alluded to earlier. When we say war broke out today, we make the mistake of pretending that a war hasn't been going for 20 months, and that in many ways, this new attack on Iran and its response are an expanded front of that very same war. It's easy to see the war with Iran as something fundamentally different, but that doesn't do much in considering the continued questions about the strategy down south, or in addressing the continued ramifications for the soldiers, the hostages, the people of Gaza, as that war continues to rage, sometimes obscured by the air show and sometimes exacerbated by it. Israel is at war amidst profound divisions. Sometime earlier on the show, maybe last year or the year before, I talked about an argument by Ron Hassner, a professor at Berkeley, about the significance of what was happening in America when it turned 75, on the precipice in 1851 of what would become some of the most seismic events in the next few years that shaped its future survival. And now it's pretty clear that this is exactly the historical story in which we are living, as the state of Israel, around the same age, reshaped its future and destiny through these armed conflicts. That future will depend heavily on its citizens and their willingness to confront Israel's enduring questions, not just the military and political questions of the moment, but the big questions, and whether it can address them productively together with one another. This is Shiri Winter-Mersel, the Institute's CEO in Jerusalem.
I looked at my WhatsApp, and there in one group, a friend posted in celebratory manner that we're in the days of Joshua, King David. We are rebuilding the Israeli empire. In another, a Holocaust scholar warns that the attack against Iran was merely made to weaken our society and to continue the path towards dictatorship in Israel. And I find myself emotionally and politically caught between grief and confusion, between ancient trauma and present fear. Even now, even in this moment of war, the familiar voices in our public discourse have not softened. If anything, they've grown louder, more rigid. The polarization that has marked our politics for years continues uninterrupted. It's disheartening to realize how few people, leaders, influencers, and any ordinary citizens seem able to pause and reassess. Each side holds fast to its narrative. On one side, they see themselves as the defenders of democracy, human rights, liberal values. On the other side, they are committed and see themselves as the defenders of tradition and national strength and security. Each side accuses the other of blindness and, in worst cases, of cowardice or betrayal. There are not enough people who are trying to listen. We even hear echoes from the polarization that we experience in face of the judicial reform protests. The pilots that are now heroically flying over Iran were just months ago condemned as traitors. The political leaders now steering the country through a war was recently accused of dismantling democracy for personal gain. And we ask ourselves, how is this still happening? While our children are being sent to fight and to risk their life, when rockets fall on our homes, when friends bury loved ones, how can some still cling to the old debates as if nothing has changed? And yet, I continue to believe in the possibility of something better. Not naively, not because I believe everyone will one day agree, but because I believe that most of us, maybe nearly all of us, have similar basic needs and moral commitments. We want the hostages home. We want our children safe. We want a functioning government. We want a justice system that delivers fairness and a public service that works well. We all want a Jewish identity that is meaningful and relevant, and the freedom to express it in ways that reflect our values and our lives. Yes, there are profound disagreements about how to achieve this. And no, the answer doesn't always lie in the middle. But if you want to get closer to the truth, to a shared future worth striving for, we need to invest less in fighting what we're against and more in building what we hope to see. At the Hartman Institute, I initiated a program called Mishmeret, which means in Hebrew, this is my shift. This is my duty to guard the country. This program invites civic and business leaders to do just that. Together, they listen deeply to competing narratives. They engage with Jewish texts and ideas. They confront uncomfortable questions about justice, peoplehood, and belonging. And in doing so, they begin to reimagine what kind of society we could be. One participant, a senior public leader, recently told me how profoundly the program shifted her perspective. She realized for the first time, even though she's a very intelligent, successful lady, how blind she had been to the illiberal edges of her own liberal views. She still struggles to find new ideological anchors, but now she listens more carefully. She asks different questions. And I think if more of us had just a bit of that openness to pause, to reflect, to ask, and not only rush to answer, our capacity to shape a shared vision to our future would grow immensely. We've all seen what a careful, strategic, coordinated effort can achieve in defending our country against Iran and Hezbollah. I believe we must bring the same energy, focus, and commitment to the essential task of rebuilding our civic life, of holding complexity, of restoring trust, of building a society worthy of the sacrifices being made in its name.
So before pivoting, or as we're pivoting, maybe what we also need now is deep listening to this world as it changes. War in Iran, political violence in America, the interlocking between Israel's articulation of itself and all of its power on the global stage with its changing place in the family of nations. All of the hope, the fear, the pride, the anxiety emanating from a small strip of land on the east end of the Mediterranean. All the sound and the fury that I hope you hear in these voices that definitely signifies something. It's okay if you're confused by all that's here. Simple narratives are lies that we tell ourselves to calm our nerves. For several days, Israel has boasted that it controls the skies above Iran. In response, With the Israeli airport shuttered and with nightly barrages of missiles raining down, the Iranians have claimed the same about Israeli airspace. I offer merely an old prayer that the skies above the land of Israel and above the land of Iran once again be covered by the divine canopy of peace, that the human beings, all of us who are created in God's image, become peacemakers, as could be our moral destiny, and that sometime soon we all get a decent night of sleep.
Thanks for listening to our show, and special thanks to our colleagues who contributed voice memos to this episode: Jordanna Amsel, Shraga Bar-On, Rana Fahoum, Elana Stein Hain, Ronit Heyd, Elhanan Miller, and Shiri Winter-Mersel. Identity Crisis is produced by me, Tessa Zitter, and our executive producer is Mital Friedman. This episode was produced with assistance from Annie Beyer-Chaffetz, researched by Gabrielle Feinstone, and edited by Gareth Hobbs at Silver Sound NYC, with music provided by So-Called. Transcripts of our show are now available on our website, typically a week after an episode airs. We're always looking for ideas for what we should cover in future episodes, so if you have a topic you'd like to hear about, or if you have comments on this episode, please write to us at identitycrisis@shalomhartman.org. For more ideas from the Shalom Hartman Institute about what's unfolding right now, sign up for our newsletter in the show notes and subscribe to this podcast everywhere podcasts are available. See you next time, and thanks for listening.